Good evening and welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rasool. South Africa has one of the most unequal societies in the world, with almost half of South Africans living below the poverty line. And for female-headed households, the poverty gap is even wider. This is problematic under normal circumstances, but in March 2020, the South African government, along with countries across the world, instituted a national lockdown in response to the deadly coronavirus. Schools were shut down, workplaces were closed, and movement of all citizens was restricted to getting essential items from the store or access to essential services. Now, gender-based violence should be classified as an essential service, but with restricted movements, women were essentially locked in 24/7 with their abusers and were unable to access services. This evening, we'll be speaking to a number of activists and experts who are working on the front lines of gender-based violence to see what the effect was for women who are experiencing gender-based violence at home. But before that, let's hear from somebody who was in that situation and how she managed to access services during lockdown.
This guy from the 17 January 2019. Then we got Toma Kaufela. But still, at Toma, like the actions I had and Adira got 10. Evelora had stopped Usa betana now, sa Toma betana everything in Yane at Toma better. Until I got pregnant, until I got miscarriage, because I abuse, I got miscarriage last year, October. Second week of lockdown, until the day I feel like I'm better and then second time ha ke tla tloha mo ne ke nna teng mo 6 e be lore go am better hape ang hobatsa mo ka mo mokokotlong and then ka mo back until ke be ke decide gore ke tsamaye. It got worse because nansa I'm better before lockdown, but how you compare the lockdown and before, for lockdown it was worse. He got anger because una le dikoloto tsa hae, so ena na sa thole next mo mmerekong wa hae, so ke bona ka ona na le stress se sentši. Batho ba go habo ba ne ba mo founela ba nyaka tšhelete and site ena na a sa bereke a sa thole any income. Ke na le di scratch marks and whatever mo mmeleng wa ka, so ke a iputsisa gore na if there will be the other day mo ke tla ke khumana motho e ke mo ratang. Ke tla ke gona jang because le ho apara like the short sleeve shirts ke ba shy because ke na le di marks tse bonahalang haholo. Ha ke tla tsamaya ene lo bana ang bethile, so ka bona gore ke tlo tsena ke se ke gwa mo magweng.
My name is Brown Legegela. I'm the founder of Green Door. Green Door is a temporary shelter for survivors of sexual gender-based violence in Diepsloot. Green Door was started in 2013 as the response to what was happening to women and children. It fills the gap that is there in the community for women who cannot go and report their cases to the police station due to different reasons, that they don't have trust in the police, in our justice system, and the police station is far away from the community, so they take time to go to the police station. Or when they go to the police station, they ended up not arriving at the police station. They end up dead because along the way to go and report such cases, they are victimized, they are raped, and they are killed. The abuse has gone up. There are a lot of people who are coming to report cases to me, and there are also people who did not come to report cases to me because of lockdown regulations. But I get those cases when I go and do house visit and do door-to-doors and distribute some food parcel to one of my clients or maybe to people that are disadvantaged. That is when I'll get these cases. I would like to plead to everyone that we must not only talk about gender-based violence or sexual violence when there are incidents of gender-based violence that have been highlighted by social media, the TV or radio, like the ones that just recently happened. It's happened every day. It's our daily life. So we need to support NGOs, we need to support NPOs that are dealing with gender-based violence, because it's really hard for us to survive helping these clients without no funds.
Welcome back. You're watching The Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rasool. As mentioned before the break, we're talking about gender-based violence during lockdown. And joining us in studio is Caroline Peters, the director and founder of the Callus Foundation, which offers a number of social welfare services, including support for gender-based violence victims. Welcome, Caroline.
Hi, thank you, Lenina.
So, Caroline, you brought interesting insights to the GBV conversation earlier on when talking about the restrictions, saying that women are unable to access services to respond to GBV, and that instead you were coming across cases in the queues at the feeding scheme. So women were showing up there, you were identifying abused women. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it was probably on the 7th day of lockdown when one of the women was standing crying in the queue, and I'll never, and all I saw was the tears. But because I see things through a gender lens, Lenina, when I saw this woman, it really just struck me, tears running and a child next to her in the queue. And then I went up to her and I said, "Are you okay?" And of course, that just brought more tears. And that's the first time, 7th day of lockdown, the first woman I encounter in the queue. So you must remember, as a community activist and leader here, before that, I've gotten WhatsApp messages and just talking women through. But this was now the first woman I encountered in the queue, literally crying in the queue. And so, those silent tears and that. And as I asked, I took her aside, and that's how that started. And subsequently, I mean, right during lockdown, then that first period, I saw more and more women, those women, because I'm loud and they know what I do, those women that would come in and those women that wouldn't look at me in the eye, the women that you see, the hurt, the pain. And like I say, because of my gender background, I saw them. And those are the ones I would ask more, how are you? What? And And I think the one told the other one, go and speak to Auntie Caroline, you know? So it was a yes,
Yes, and that started sort of, I guess, a chain where you became a
yes,
go-to person who
yes.
can assist.
Yes,
Okay.
that's right. That's right. And from that, Lenina, I started a support group. And I know that during lockdown, we couldn't gather really. So I had it right here at my home in the garage, you know. I took on these women because it just became too many of them to do one-on-one. And we were running the feeding scheme, trying to feed people, so there was a number of things we had to see to, and thus then started the support group for women that I still do twice a week now. Initially we started with a 2, then it went to 4. I remember the one that was just one of them, and now we have 12 women in the garage that we meet with, and we adhere to the rules, we stick to social distancing. And one of the things that I thought, oh my goodness, this is not legal for us to gather. But then again, there was no service that the women could go to, or in fact, there were service, but it was not accessible.
Yeah.
This was accessible. They could walk here to my home.
Yeah, and Caroline, just on that in terms of services, so I mean, one of the most publicized sort of interventions, if we could call it that, from government was the National Command Center for Gender-Based Violence, which is essentially a call-in line or SMS line, and was supposed to act as sort of a referral. Given that people are now locked down, women are locked in with the abusers, and they should be able to call in and then be referred to different services for help. But we've heard that it hasn't worked so efficiently. There are some other issues with that in terms of women having access to airtime or data, to phone or SMS in. And then from your perspective also, just having worked with women then on the ground who clearly didn't use the center or use the call line as their first port of call, what can you tell us about the services that are available to women as a recourse for domestic violence, and is it enough?
Lenina, I'm smiling because I really do not want to be negative, but right now it's so hard not to be. I have been working in the sector for many years, and services has been, I mean, NP or us as civil society or NGOs, NPOs has been running services for many years. You must remember during lockdown, women were restricted. So for instance, I would say I stay close to Sarki Batman Center that women would normally access. Because women's movement were restricted, they could not access those services. And that's just an example. So then the GBV command center was supposed to be, or they are not, they're supposed to be, they are the service that, or the center that women is supposed to access or have access to. Like you said, firstly, the resource, remember, it's a telephone call, it's a WhatsApp. If it's between a mother feeding a child a slice of bread or making a phone call, she would rather take the abuse, so it's about the resources, our assumption that women have access to airtime and data. Then it was a struggle initially to get through to the GBVCC, the command center or the hotline. Women would call, calls are not answered, and that was the initial stage of lockdown, still when we were in level 5. About 3 weeks after lockdown, that was sorted out. In fact, more than 3 weeks, 6 weeks into lockdown, women got a better response. But I'm just going to highlight one of the things on the Cape Flats, many women speaks Afrikaans. So one of the clients I saw does not speak English. She waited all day for someone to speak to in Afrikaans. By 6, this is now from the morning, by 6 o'clock the evening, I translated to her. So it's about they Afrikaans is an official language, and as you know, here on the Cape Flats, many women speak Afrikaans. Then the geographically, because it's a centralized, it's centralized. The councillors were not aware of geographics of Cape Town, and the sensitivity about gangsterism in Cape Town or the Cape Flats. When one of the clients said to the social worker telephonically, I cannot live with my mother around the corner from him because he's a gang leader. She says, no, why don't you stay with your mother? Your mother's right there with you. Your mother can support you. You know, there was enough spaces in shelters. I mean, shelters were organized into stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 2. So there was intake shelters where women would stay for 2 weeks. The bottleneck for access to shelters was at the GBV command center. So during lockdown, shelters, there are enough shelter spaces, Lenina, here, and I'm speaking for here in the Western Cape and here in the metropole.
Yeah.
But the bottleneck, because all cases had to be referred to GBV command center, there was a bottleneck with getting women placed in shelters. We would wait on the GBV command center to give me a reference. I mean, I can go on and on. The one social worker GBV command center said to me, you cannot have so many reference numbers because remember, I had the resources to call into for the client. So the services that was available for 2 women, like your 0800 428 number was advertised, but it was not effective.
I see. And I mean, Caroline, we both know, I think, that, services for victims of gender-based violence in general have never, worked perfectly, if I can put it like that. So, but I mean, as you're saying, during lockdown, it's been exacerbated. It's even, it was more necessary because of the restriction of movement. Just going into end of our interview, I just want to ask, the lockdown has given us sort of a spotlight on GBV and gender-based violence services, which we've said have never really worked perfectly. It is really just honed in on sort of those bottlenecks, on language barriers, on the geography and so forth. What would you like to see going forward in order to make the system more efficient and better able to work for victims and survivors of gender-based violence?
A decentralized response, Lenina, So if clients are here from Cape Town, there should be some helpline or hotline or command center that is specific to our geographics, that understands the dynamics of the Cape Flats, that gangsterism is intersectional with violence against women, that drugs is intersectional, so those things that we can know. We know the geographics of our communities here in Cape Town. Having said that, also that service is more accessible. I mean, one of the things for me that really stood out now during lockdown was also that women need services in the communities. So often women do not have the resources to go outside of the area, to go to Wynberg, or to go to, to get to the courts, to get to services. So for me, it would make sense to have these services brought to the communities. Even if we do it one morning a week, there's legal services. 2 mornings a week, there'll be, services to the women in the areas where they live, Lenina. And that is what I'd like to see. That we do not have to have taxi fare to travel to town, but that our services is brought within walking distance of women. Yeah.
No, exactly. I agree. Thank you so much for joining us, Caroline. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you for the amazing work that you do in the communities.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me, Lenina. And thank you to you and your show for highlighting these very, very important issues. And as you know, we've got a spike in cases, and it's not like it's not happening. We know that this happens all the time, but
Yeah.
once again, we've seen it highlight and yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
yeah. So Aluta continua.
That was Caroline Peters, founder of the Callus Foundation. And now we're going to speak to Felicity Guest, who is the founder of Child Maintenance Difficulties South Africa. And we're just going to be speaking about what the lockdown has meant to parents of children who were separated, and especially those who rely on child maintenance in order to make it through the month, given that workplaces have shut down, schools have shut down, and what effect that has had on parents and on women. Thank you for joining us, Felicity.
Hello, Lenina. Thank you for having me, and hello to your viewers.
And it's so great to have you, Felicity. And this was an issue that didn't get as much airtime, I think, as all of the other issues. And so, can you describe some of the issues and problems that women experience when they were trying to apply for maintenance? Because there's various streams here. There would be women who had cases in the system already, women who were affected by existing maintenance agreements that were broken. And I think not just women, obviously a lot of fathers had also lost their jobs, a lot of parents had lost their jobs. But I think the effect on the custodial parents who were looking after the children.
I think that while we are going, we're in a very extraordinary times that nobody really had time to prepare for. A lot of the things were pre-existing. The challenges of women carrying the bulk of the financial burden was pre-existing, and it has been really compounded by these extraordinary circumstances that we find ourselves in. And it's I think that one has to have a certain amount of empathy and understanding, but also to understand, as you said, there wasn't much clarification about procedures to follow. All that was said was that the family courts are open and that they recognize that women have to, or parents have to have access to be able to go and address these issues. They did say that it's in the beginning it was only for new applications and one needs to have all the documents in place. But if that was, that's all fair and well. But when women got to the courts were closed, a lot of them. They were turned away by security with no information given about how to pursue this. They were just told to come back because the courts are closed. And that is still ongoing. And then compounded by the fact that when women get there, some of the courts are closed because there've been infections at some of the courts. And it's just, for me, why we're still in this situation so many years later is because I still believe that the government doesn't really understand the systemic problems or admit to these systemic problems. And it's been unveiled now during this time.
Yes.
And it's very difficult to, push for enforcement because we have a situation where the person responsible for paying maintenance to the order was made against a lot of them have lost their jobs. But then, so have a lot of the primary caregivers lost their jobs. And, the responsibility is for them that children still have to eat. That's the absolute basic, fundamental. To get through this is to be able to survive it. And we can't survive it if we can't eat.
No, exactly. And I know that for many, this is an unprecedented lockdown. There's been a knock-on effect on schools, so a lot of kids are staying home, but parents still have to pay school fees because obviously that would affect payments to those staff. And so there's a huge knock-on effect. You say that some of the courts were closed. People were told that the courts were open. When they arrived there, some of the courts were closed. And even going there in itself took resources and money, which we can acknowledge. And you speak about this putting a spotlight on sort of longer term or systemic issues. So one of them, for instance, is communication. And I think what you're saying is that the communication was really bad, just even if the courts are open or whether they're closed. Is this in itself a longer term problem when women try to sort of access the courts, phone in for updates and those sorts of things?
It's, these problems were pre-existing. Anybody who's tried to get hold of the maintenance courts telephonically, there's complaints about every single court. And the biggest complaint is that they don't answer the phones. So, the helplessness, hopelessness of women is how do they access the courts? I mean, they can't go there, the courts are closed. They can't phone them. A lot of women don't have email, and even if you do email, you don't get a response. So these conditions were pre-existing, or problems were pre-existing. And I mean, the interesting thing when I was doing my research during this time, Australia, for example, and the UK for that matter, they were able to go online, first of all, and they were able to lodge that maintenance had been not paid. The second thing is there was relief offered via the maintenance system, and they could access this relief immediately as soon as these countries went into lockdown via a portal using their reference number, and the relief for them was immediate. So, I mean, I don't know, there's been so much money allocated to the Department of Justice to digitize everything and capture all the records, yet maintenance does not seem to have made it onto the list. So what's happened during this time where the Department of Social Development made relief available, and that also was not communicated very well for parents who were not getting their maintenance. It was a very small amount, but they had to access it via DST. It was trying to deal with additional relief via SESA. They couldn't go into into DST. I mean, some of them who applied 3 months ago still haven't even had that relief. So why has this never been a priority for the DOJ to digitize maintenance matters?
Thank you, Felicity. And tell me, you deal with women directly who are going through these issues or having problems with the courts and so forth. Especially during lockdown with increased childcare, with maintenance payments that were either cut or not happening. What is the physical and emotional toll that this has taken on some of the women that you've spoken with?
One of hopelessness, because the burden has been on them to try and get food parcels. A very small percentage have been successful. And, while there has been a lot of sympathy and empathy for the maintenance, the person paying the maintenance, that they have lost their jobs. My appeal has been, well, the very least that you can do is you arrange food parcels or don't stand in lines, and there's so many civil organizations that are providing food. Why don't they go and somehow, at least provide food for their children? Because the primary parent is the one who is having to somehow try and manifest food for the children. And, besides all the other burdens of trying to keep them busy and trying to do homeschooling, I mean, they're absolutely marginalized. Their biggest priority is to be able to feed their children. Yet they have to go and stand in queues, and the children are having to stand in the queues, which just also puts them more at risk. And there seems to be this absolute detachment that because they're not physically there, that they do not experience the emotional and the mental stress that this places on the primary parents.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that, for those insights into how the lockdown has affected maintenance, women and families, and especially children. It was very wonderful to have you joining us once again.
Thank you, Lenina. It was great being here.
That was Felicity Guest, founder of Child Maintenance Difficulties South Africa, speaking about the issues that families have been going through during lockdown. And now we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. Before the break, we spoke to Caroline Peters and Felicity Guest about gender-based violence during lockdown. And now we've got another guest, Yolanda Petersen, who is co-founder of Women Lead Movement that educates women and girls, but also citizens in general, on their rights. Welcome, Yolanda. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lenina. Thank you so much.
So Yolanda, one of the things we wanted to chat about is the frustrations that you experienced even before lockdown, just navigating the system, and then recently your colleague, who is a lawyer, tried to assist a woman to get a protection order, I think first at SAPS and then at the court, and the experience was less than satisfactory. So could you tell us about some of your frustrations in general that women experience, but also, and then within the context of lockdown, how was that?
You know what, Lenina? In context of lockdown, pre-lockdown, domestic violence and gender-based violence and femicide existed. During lockdown, the problem is perpetuated and undoubtedly will remain so post-lockdown. I think most of the frustration comes around where women going into the system, applying for protection orders, don't really understand their rights. It starts with knowing your basic rights, and that would be your right to safety and your right to dignity, your right to equality, coming from the situation they've been in, going out to get some help. They are frightened, they are fearful, they do not know what to expect within the system. Coming from a situation where, you know, you're already in an abusive situation, the control of power, the manipulation that goes in, you are fearful of that. On the flip side, you're entering into a system that is equally frustrating, because now we are having police on the policing front, as well as our court, the clerks of the court on the court front, also dealing with protection order cases with a lot of control, a lot of abuse of control, a lot of manipulation, and these women literally stand there on their own. I think that with lockdown, before lockdown even started, the problems remain the same. Front end at the court system, front end at the policing system, and the actual women in the situation. Another frustration is just not understanding the process that you're going through. The incomplete insensitivity and the arrogance, the help that you're getting from frontline. I find a lot of women come to us and they're struggling with this so much that it actually delays the entire process, because they're going back and fro with this.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. And I can just imagine, I mean, approaching court already in a traumatized state, already afraid of repercussions of being there, and then being sort of not treated well for taking this bold step to do something about your situation. And so within that context, could I ask, what are some shifts, as someone who has been through the system, or someone within your organization who speaks to women a lot of the time who have these issues, what are some of the solutions or shifts that we need to make, whether it's big ones or small ones, for instance, better service delivery perhaps, or better respect for victims, that we can make so that women feel more comfortable in the system, so that the system can work more efficiently and effectively for women? Could you give us some of your views?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if we're looking at an overall solution, and we're looking at what we can do. We would like to see a total transformation of the criminal justice system, a total transformation. And that would then include everybody. We are all stakeholders when it comes to domestic violence and GBV within our communities, within our families, on an individual level, and just from a governmental level as well, political will, throwing more resources behind police stations and getting the officers equipped at front desk to be dealing with this, getting them trained up, knowing the Constitution. I think a lot of the time it's also women needing to understand their rights before they approach the court system. So preventative education is what Women Lead Movement does a lot of on the ground. And it won't be as daunting if you are faced with a situation and you're needing to get a protection order. If you understand it and if you've been educated on it prior to your private situation, you could access and go through the system a lot better. But I do think that it's important to note that this is a problem that sits at the heart of all of us. All of us are responsible, equally responsible, to get this situation within our communities, within our society, healed and better. Because that is what society is lacking at the moment. We used to have families that knows of abusive situations and was back in the day willing to take in the mom, and we were referring to women now, and the kids, and help them. We do not see that anymore. We see a lot of people turning a blind eye in terms of helping women who is genuinely in an abusive situation that needs the immediate help. We also find the delay of police reaching these women when they do cry out for help. Those interim protection orders. I mean, a good case came through a few weeks ago with a young mom and a daughter, Lucretia, where she went to the police station 2 weeks before she was murdered, waiting on a protection order. I think that if the trend continues, we're going to see and hear a lot more of those type of cases coming to the forefront, where women have reached out for help. Women are not getting the help at the time that they need to get the help. And what does it result in? Our women and our young children losing their lives. So if we look at a big term solution, we're looking at a total transformation of the justice system. If we're looking at a midterm solution, we're looking at specialized GBV units within our policing stations. Special centers, like, corners where women are taken and they are taken through their case, especially like little rape courts and rooms, etc., etc. And then in the shorter term view, we're looking at training up our police, making sure that they understand legislation as well, making sure that they understand rights, and then they are able to effectively, with empathy and sympathy, deal with these women because they've already been through so much.
Well, thank you so much, Yolanda. Those are bold visions and dreams that we hope will become a reality and that we'll keep pushing for. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lenina. Have a good afternoon.
You too. And joining us now is Luvuyo Zahela, who's program manager for Cesvi, who ran a number of programs around gender-based violence with men, women, and children, and also ran a shelter in Philippi for abused women. Luvuyo, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Lenina. Good morning, and good morning to the Cape Town TV viewers.
So, Luvuyo, just quickly, could you give us a little bit of a rundown of the GBV programs that you run or the work that you do around GBV in, is it primarily Philippi?
It's basically Philippi and surrounding areas, and Cesvi started way back in 2001, 2002 in South Africa at the time of HIV and AIDS. And the issues were more around the issues of HIV AIDS, and then resulted in incidents of domestic violence. And those incidents prompted that Cesvi look into the issue of establishing collaborations with local organizations in order to realize a safe home for abused women and children. Once women find themselves in these destructive or unbearable conditions in their homes, they are able to come into a safe space where they're supported through a number of services. Of course, one being the shelter, which is basically run now by Sizalkenza together of Cesvi. And then we also have a partner in the form of Mosaic, who also deals specifically with issues of domestic violence and helping women when they have to appear in court in terms of dealing with the perpetrators in court and preparing for those kind of presentation and arguments. Because sometimes some of the perpetrators go away free in court because the victim has not been properly prepared. So the work of Mosaic is to ensure that each time a woman goes to court, that person is well prepared. But also more importantly, how do we help to restore family and mediate where is possible and where there's still a chance of us facilitating dialogues between the wife and the husband. But the best interest of the victim is always the paramount important one, especially when it comes also to children, because children in many cases are ignored in this equation because everyone focuses on the victim being the woman, but there's that victim who's also a child who's not able to share his or her views, and part of our programs then started to look into that space of child protection and ensuring children are also protected. So all the services that we offer as a basket of services within our premises, which is the House of Smile, is aimed at empowering the woman and ensuring that we reduce the incidence of gender-based violence. And we've recently also started a program focusing on men. We need men. We need to model into society a group of men that understands their role, and that the saying enough is enough is not enough, Lenina, to be honest with you, unless there are actions, practical actions put in place to assure women that they are safe with their husbands, with their partners, with men in general in society. It cannot be that us as men, we are the ones who are perpetrators of this violence instead of us protecting, creating an enabling environment.
That all sounds absolutely amazing, and I especially love the sort of partnering with organizations across the board to try and tackle, which is generally necessary. I just want to come a little bit back to the lockdown. And so in the context of all the work that you're doing, we are obviously in an unprecedented pandemic that no one has ever seen before. You know, you mentioned when we spoke a little bit about your expectations of lockdown and the preparations for lockdown within the context of gender-based violence, and then a bit of a surprise when lockdown happened. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Our expectations was that there'll be more incidents reported because now the men or the perpetrators who are usually maybe doing other things during the day and wandering around or are at work, and now they are locked down in this one space with the victim, and that the victim will find it unbearable and be able to report it. But because of the lockdown restrictions and the limited movements, and what we've been hearing from the women coming out now is that they found it difficult to reach out for help and support during those level 5 and level 4 lockdown restrictions, because their movements were limited. Also, their fear was that if they go to a police station and they find the police station is not receiving or taking cases of gender-based violence and domestic violence, because some of the police stations at some point were closed down because of the infections that were happening there. There were limited services, even in terms of DSTV being available in their offices on the ground. So it became practically impossible for women to find the kind of support they would have actually naturally got if there was no lockdown. And we've now seen with level 3, women coming in and reporting these cases. And if you look at when the case started, it actually started way back, even during those times of before level 5, but it escalated during lockdown because everyone was in this one space, and it became quite difficult for the woman to reach out. And those are the kind of reports we're getting, and we're able now to pick up on and be able to support these women and be able to refer them to the necessary support services, whether being the court, or to say they need to open cases with SAPS so that they obtain protection orders against the perpetrators. In some instances, you then look at what options are available. Do they want to come to the shelter and stay at the shelter? And sometimes women, because of issues of dignity and so on, the shelter becomes the last resort for them to consider as an option. They would want to stay at home. However, the conditions at home become unbearable. And one of the challenges we have in society in general is that we don't have that so closely knitted family fabric that we used to have in the olden days. Everyone is on his own or her own and living your life with your little family and so forth. It becomes difficult to then access that kind of support. However, if one looks at what happened in level 5 and level 4, is that women were locked down, were actually more suppressed and oppressed in terms of having to live in these unbearable conditions. And we're starting to see them now coming out. And that is why we're also trying to champion against this violence. And we've seen a surge of this violence during level 3 of the lockdown restrictions, that now that people are allowed to move around, there's so much cases being reported, but also the incidents of violence where women are being beaten or killed. We see on Facebook, we see everywhere, we see on the news. Everyone, even here in Philippi, we have a young girl of the age of 17, Amaretu, who was actually killed by this man, and that's an ongoing case.
Thank you, Luvuyo. I mean, you've said a lot and answered actually a lot of the questions that I had just looking at the comparison before lockdown and then after and what's happening now. May I ask, just to conclude, what do you think, having worked in this space, not just during lockdown, for a long time before, being able to offer those comparisons to issues with the system before then and sort of what we've been seeing, how those issues have exacerbated or gotten worse during lockdown, what shifts would you like to see, big or small, to try and make the system a bit better and more efficient for survivors?
We need to lock down men and sit them down and be able to say to them, look, enough is enough, but from today onwards, this is how we are expecting men to behave and so forth. And we need to protect women in society. Women and young girls have to feel that they also are equally entitled to the rights and freedoms that are benefited by men and young boys. And we need to go to those youth clubs and so forth.
Thank you, Luvuyo. I mean, those are all wonderful, wonderful and very valid statements. I want to thank you so much for joining us and wish you well in the work that you are doing with women and children and especially men.
Thank you, Lenina, and thank you to the viewers.
That was Luvuyo Zahela from Cesvi. Now we're going to take a short break and we'll be back after this. That was our show for the evening. Thank you for joining us. As South Africa works its way through the lockdown and beyond, we need to all take it upon ourselves to assist in the fight against gender-based violence and make sure that it is not left behind. Little things you can do is check up on women you are concerned about who might find themselves in domestic violence situations. Try to send them food or airtime or data so that they are able to reach out when they have help. And if you or someone you know is in a situation and needs help, you can call the Gender-Based Violence Command Center helpline on 0800 428 428. Thank you very much. I'm Lenina Rasool. Good night.